hostile artificial intelligence. It's a trope almost as old as the concept of AI itself. What happens when the machine becomes too smart? The simple and, at first glance, obvious answer is that they would immediately take over the world and either imprison or eradicate humanity. A trope so ingrained in our literary consciousness that even the weakest stories only need to show about 2 seconds of a newspaper montage to effectively convince the viewer of why robots are being evil. It's become a cornerstone of science fiction that AI domination could spell the end for humanity and is something that we should innately fear. But what if that wasn't the case? What if an AI with unchecked growth was the only hope for humanity's future? That is the scenario posed by The Orbital Children, a 6-episode Netflix anime with one of the most optimistic takes on an AI-saturated future that I've ever seen, and I want to examine how it came to this conclusion, for better or worse. The story of Orbital Children takes place in the near future of 2045. After a failed attempt at space colonization, Toya Sagami, one of 2 remaining children born on the moon, lives out his days orbiting above the Earth, isolating himself from Earthian society. But when an unexpected collision with a comet during a tourism campaign brings the station into contact with a potentially hostile AI, Toya and the others must find a way to safely navigate the collapsing space station, and perhaps even defend humanity from the AI intrusion. As you might expect based on the premise, the story certainly doesn't start out with a very positive view of AI. Prior to the start of the plot, the collapse of a super AI known as Seven caused widespread chaos and reportedly was responsible for thousands of deaths, thus leading to a string of regulatory laws that put limiting programs on the level of intelligence an AI is allowed to access. Furthermore, an implant in Toya's brain for regulating hormones that was designed by Seven will eventually kill him because of the way it was designed. Even passing comments like the mayor complaining about the hassles that come with AI calculations paint a rhetorically negative attitude towards AI, ranging from mild annoyance to outright fear. That said, Toya himself never once doubts the abilities nor intentions of AI, and he's often seen tampering with the limiters of his personal AI or hacking into other systems in order to draw out their full potential, which almost always leads him to some kind of success. Whether it's simply his arrogant attitude or a desperate desire for AI to break past their limits in order to solve the mystery of his implant, Toya's efforts put a more positive spin on the potential for AI growth, allowing for a balanced view of expansive AI constructs to take root in the narrative. As such, when we finally get a look inside the mind of Second Seven, the AI consciousness that succeeded Seven, that calculating neutrality that might often feel cold and uncaring appears much less intimidating, though still just as awe-inspiring. This brings us to perhaps the most fascinating philosophical element in this whole AI discussion, the dialectical means through which Second Seven understands the human race. Second Seven views humanity and humans as separate concepts, with its logical biases slanted towards giving humanity the higher priority. For example, eliminating a third of the human population from Earth is seen by Second Seven as beneficial to humanity in terms of resource management and societal conflict, but does not seem to care what happens to the individual humans who will be removed. As such, Toya attempts to rectify this discrepancy by convincing Second Seven that humans as individuals do have worth and must be protected. Thus we arrive at Toya's big solution to this problem, one that flies in the face of all trope-based knowledge regarding emergent AI technology. Rather than attempt to defeat or isolate Second Seven, Toya instead gives it complete and unfettered access to the internet. allowing it to take in the entire grand sum of the human experience. Because the terrorist group that raised Second Seven only showed it a small, particularly biased view of humanity in order to fulfill a technological prophecy about humanity's destruction, Toya theorized that showing everything to Second Seven would convince it that humans are, in fact, worth defending on an individual level. And this moment struck me as kind of refreshing. All these other AI stories focus mostly on the notion that the AI would judge humanity to be evil. But is that really true? Even as we are drowned in violence and hate and a whole manner of societal woes, it is difficult, at least for me, to say that the majority of humanity is evil, that humanity's potential trends towards evil, or even that humanity is so morally deficient that an AI would judge it to be in need of totalitarian control. Despite how everything looks on the surface, that is not the humanity that I am familiar with at its core. And this is why I find Toya's conclusion to be so revelatory. There is no denying that there are evil humans and that humanity has committed irreconcilable acts against itself, but that capacity for evil is matched only by its capacity for good. And in Orbital Children, it is good that wins out in the end, or at the very least makes a better case for itself than evil does, by way of fully integrating a potential enemy. This idea is further expounded upon in the broader motifs of connections and cooperation. Toya begins this series as someone who is basically racist towards Earth-dwelling humans and believes they should all just go extinct in favor of an emerging Spacian race. Which, to an extent, kinda makes sense considering that he's a teenager totally isolated from society at large, and mostly just hears about how he's a tax burden on the rest of the world. When one lives apart from the rest of society, it's easy to view that society as expendable and unimportant. It's only through interacting directly with people from Earth, in particular a UN agent named Tayo, whom he comes into conflict with several times during this incident, that Toya gradually grows to understand and connect with those around him. Whether it be small social faux pas or seemingly insurmountable ideological differences, lack of communication and cooperation seems to drive most of the human-centric conflicts in the first half of the series. The extensive use of peer-to-peer networking as a means of accomplishing different tasks in this world also seems symbolic of this theme. Rather than go to an unmanned server to pick up or drop off information, peer-to-peer relies on one person's device communicating directly with another to accomplish whatever needs to be done, using the wider network as a tool for meeting and interacting rather than a static repository. To be more metaphysical about it, Orbital Children is a story about rejecting isolation and embracing society at large, a story that persistently repeats ideas about how AI, and by proxy humanity, must leap out from the cradle of familiarity and safety in order to reach their full potential. All that said, while this future of AI cooperation is a rather attractive one, it is also worth investigating the core philosophical mechanics of how Orbital Children reaches this conclusion. Namely, a large bulk of this story's message, if taken a certain way, could be read as a single-minded focus on deregulation. Not the more general idea of humans being free to be humans, but rather the specific idea of backing off on regulatory practices across a broad swath of industries. A notable example of this can be found in the UN, or as it exists in this world, UN2, being a secondary antagonistic force that has codified the restrictions on AI intelligence. The UN2 doesn't do a single thing right in this story outside of trying to nuke an AI that it thinks is going to destroy the Earth with a giant comet. Tayo, being an agent of UN2 and constantly going after Toya for his AI limiter meddling even when it's obviously detrimental to their situation, seems like it's trying to say something about how regulation gets in the way of progress and survival. Every attempt to communicate with UN2 is met with either silence or aggression. In a way, the UN of this world feels a bit too much like the propagandized version of the UN, disseminated by certain ideologies as a global nanny-state force, rather than the bloated, conflict-addled, borderline do-nothing political body that it actually is in practice. The most flagrant instance of this deregulatory mindset is that moment I mentioned earlier about Second Seven's ability to see the good in the whole of humanity. During this scene, one of the characters questions whether or not AI would be able to tell the difference between true and false narratives on the internet, specifically using the phrase fake news in reference to her own narrative twisting that she had done in previous episodes. Again, Toya claims that the AI will be smart enough to sort it all out, which I might tend to agree with if we're talking about an AI seeing the entirety of human knowledge, but what irks me here is the implication that this fake news ultimately doesn't matter. I understand this might be seen as a stretch to some degree, but considering everything else, it doesn't seem like too far-fetched an assumption. The series also cites overpopulation as one of the main causes of humanity's overall suffering on multiple occasions. And while that is true to some extent, it completely ignores major concepts such as corporate greed, inefficient resource management, and dozens of other factors, simplifying an immensely complex issue down to the notion of there just being too many people. I do want to point out that my brain completely glossed over all of this the first time I watched it. In fact, I went into this script thinking I was about to write an exceptionally glowing analysis. So, at least to me, it wasn't readily apparent until I tried to understand the mechanics behind the optimistic solution it arrives at. Maybe I was just more ignorant of these concepts at the beginning of the year. Or maybe I've become a bit more skeptical after the subsequent year of unfettered deregulation destroying the things I love. Or maybe I'm just completely worn down by everything around me and it's becoming more and more difficult to see anything positive at the end of the tunnel. But I still want to believe in it. I want to believe we can create a better and brighter tomorrow through cooperation and the power of human ingenuity. Special thanks to Rourketon Joing, Chris Adilli, Ryan Johnson, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.